Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here to talk a little bit about mixing heavy drums and how you should go about dealing with ghost notes. Just recently, a subscriber asked me an excellent question. He asked, what do you do when you have to get rid of cymbal bleed in your snare track, your live snare track, but you don't want to cut out the ghost notes or when the drummer is playing super quietly and light on the snare? And that's really what ghost notes are. They're super subtle, light snare hits. If you've ever tried to deal with this, you're going to notice that when you set your gate properly to cut out all of the harsh cymbal bleed, especially from the hi-hat, all of a sudden, all your ghost notes disappear. And when ghost notes are not heard in a mix, I know from experience, it does not make drummers too happy. So what I have here is a simple example that features pretty much the main way that I deal with this issue, because the truth is there's no one magical fix to this problem. It's not like you could buy a special plugin that's going to magically gate out cymbal bleed, but let your ghost notes through. If it exists, I've never heard of it, but I have a very simple way to combat this, and I'm going to share it with you in this video. So in this audio sample, I have a chorus of a song that's super heavy, super solid snare hits with little ghost notes subtly in between the main snare hits within the groove. So pay close attention and listen for the ghost notes throughout this chorus of this song. Let's check it out. So there you have it. You probably noticed that you can hear the main snare hits nice and hard, but those subtle, super light ghost notes are still there. And if you're a drummer and you're listening, I'm sure you could have no problem picking up on where the ghost notes take place. They're not ridiculously loud. We don't want our ghost notes to be distracting, but we pretty much want them to sound like how they sound in the room when a drummer is playing. So as far as my drum tracks here, it's so simple. I have a kick sample for a nice consistent kick drum sound because this is a modern mix. I have a snare sample, which is just a sample of the drummer's snare blended in with the live snare. It's the exact same snare drum. I have my main snare drum track. I have my snare bottom, my toms, overheads, ride hat, splash, and room track. But I have an additional track here called ghosties. Now, like I said, there is no magical one quick fix to this. I found that the best way to deal with this, for the most part, is to either automate the gate on your snare drum, which can work. The only problem with that is that if you have a lot of cymbal bleed, you're still going to be in trouble with the ghost notes, because even if you disable the gate on your snare during the ghost notes, you're going to get a ton of high-end cymbal bleed through your snare track, which usually ends up sounding not all that pleasant. So what I do, and it's very easy, I go in to my live snare track. So here I have a snare track, and then I have a snare sample track, which is just a clean hit. And the snare sample is not being played on the ghost notes. In other words, I did not trigger my sample from ghost notes at all. I left the ghost notes completely natural. But when I mixed the song, I went in and copied any of the space. If you look here on my main snare track, it's blank in this space. And it's blank here. And that's because I took the audio and copied it over to this track that I call Ghosties. And I treat this track in a completely separate fashion from how I treat my main snare and even my snare sample track. So are you ready for how I treat this ghost notes track? It could not be simpler. I found that I actually prefer to not compress usually the ghost notes track because it brings up too much cymbal bleed. I just make sure that the ghost notes are sitting at a pretty healthy level in my mix, usually a little louder than my main snare track because the ghost notes are hit so light, and they don't have to sound powerful. They just have to be there. I also found that when I EQ them, I prefer to get rid of a lot of the excess low end, which is going to bring up a lot of the kick drum bleed, and also a ton of the excess top end, all the cymbal bleed. So if you look in this EQ, all frequencies above 3.5K are gone. All frequencies below 280 hertz are gone. And I'm even boosting a little bit. Actually, the boost that I have here is being cut out by the high pass filter. But I found that the majority of the tone that you want from ghost notes are going to be in the lower mid-range. So if you notice when you listen to the track or the drums in total, the ghost notes don't necessarily sound dark, even though I'm completely removing top end. And that's because ghost notes, the fundamental pitch, is not going to be up there in the upper mids and high end. So I'm going to play the sample back one more time in context, and I want you to pay close attention to those ghost notes once more. I'm going to just play part of the chorus. So when you hear in isolation, it kind of sounds funny, but within context of the rest of the drum mix, and especially the rest of the mix in total with the guitars, bass, and when vocals are on here, you will never notice it popping in a strange way because your ear is more drawn to the lower mids, which is where I'm focusing this sound in the first place. And that's it. That's all there is to it. This is how I generally deal with ghost notes, especially if it's a loud, crazy mix where, you know, the drummer's hitting hard snare hits, then all of a sudden barely touching the snare for the ghost notes while he's still crashing on cymbals and laying hard into the hi-hat. Again, you can try using compression if you want to bring out the ghost notes. It depends on what type of ghost notes you're mixing. If they're very, very subtle, like the ones that you're hearing here with just barely tapping the snare, I find that I don't like using compression because I don't want to bring up any of that excess stuff that's happening in the background. But if it's a ghost note that's a little more like a live snare hit or more like a full volume snare hit just brought down, let's say 50%, then maybe I'll just automate the gate on my snare track, or I'll approach it the same way, but maybe I'll do less filtering and maybe I'll even compress it a little just to bring a little more smack out of the ghost notes. And there you have it. This is my approach. I don't know if many other people use this approach, but it served me well for at least the last 10 years. And more often than not, it's exactly how I deal with ghost notes when I'm dealing with a drummer that's bashing all over the kit and then all of a sudden I'm playing super duper light for those ghost notes. So tell me, I would love to know, how do you deal with ghost notes in your mix? Leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'd love to hear your opinion. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and a ton of other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. Now, if you dug the guitar tone that you heard in this mix, you could achieve the exact same tone using my custom guitar cab impulse response Octapack. What you're hearing is the SM57 #1 from the Octapack. The Octapack comes with 8 impulse responses, 2 SM57s, 2 SM81s, 2 Sennheiser E609s, as well as 2 Electro Voice RE16s. Again, you can have the Octapack for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. And until next time, happy mixing.